Brandon here. I'm an American nurse from Texas that moved to Sweden 2.5 years ago, and I want to discuss the top 10 reasons that made me choose moving to Sweden over other countries. Had a lot of people wondering why I chose Sweden as opposed to other places. Well, I'm going to talk about that. Now, this list is not exhaustive. There are other reasons that went into me choosing Sweden, and this is a very personal list to me. So another person may have a completely different thought process as to where that they would want to move. And I'm not saying to people that they need to come and move to Sweden. This is just why I chose Sweden over other places. I've had some people saying, hey, why didn't you go to Norway, Netherlands, Australia, a whole lot of other places like that. And I'm going to talk about that. Very first reason right off the bat is this is the thing that I have wanted to do my entire life. Not necessarily moving to Sweden, but moving to Europe in general. My grandmother was American, but she was married to my grandfather who was in the United States Air Force. And because of that, they moved all around the world. They lived in Germany for several years. They moved to Great Britain, and then my mother was born in Great Britain during that process, and then they moved back to the States. When I was a child, my grandmother talked all the time about her experiences living all around the world. I wanted to have a similar experience for myself. And I remember being a child, being completely mesmerized by my globe and my maps that I had all over the walls in my room, and dreaming about all these different places I would visit. And I was extremely fascinated with Europe because there's all these different countries, different languages, different foods, different architecture, all this history. And I wanted to be able to experience that since I was very young. Number two reason has to do with close proximity to Europe. It just made sense that I lived somewhere in Europe if I love traveling in Europe. And going from America is a very difficult thing. You got to think about all the hours on the plane. A lot of the flights are not direct. It costs a lot of money to fly from the United States to go to Europe. And we don't really get much vacation time in the United States. You know, a lot of jobs don't even offer 2 weeks vacation. A lot of the jobs I worked in, such as in pharmacy and in construction, I had no vacation time. So it wasn't an option for me to be able to fly to Europe for a long time. And then even when I got the vacation time, a lot of that vacation time had to be used if I was sick. It went towards my sick pay. On top of that, then a lot of the people I worked with became very jealous and irritated if I would go on vacations, and people would be vindictive to me. I remember in the healthcare system, if I took a 2-week vacation, people were so jealous about me going to England or something like that for 11 days that next thing you know, they would go behind my back and do certain things like try to give me really bad shifts to work, a really bad schedule, a very passive-aggressive type stuff. And so it really wasn't a sustainable thing to be making frequent trips to Europe. So it just made more sense that I actually live in Europe. You know, here, if you want to take a couple days off, you can go skiing in Germany. You can take a train ride. You can take the bus or fly for pretty cheap here. It's so much more easy to do as opposed to going from the United States and coming to Europe. Third reason has to do with healthcare. I do have health issues, and it made sense that I live in a country that has a good healthcare system. A lot of people had said, well, why don't you move to these cheaper places? You know, I had thought about moving to Vietnam. Yeah, you can live in a cheap apartment, but your health is extremely important. And so a lot of these places, the water is not safe to drink, and then you get sick, and then you end up in the hospital, and then you have to pay cash pay. It made more sense to me to live somewhere where the technology and healthcare is a little bit more advanced, and then people have access to it. So after I got a job, started paying taxes, and got a tax identification number, I then had access to healthcare here in Sweden. And I actually work in the healthcare system, and it's not a perfect system. There are things I think could be improved, but there is no perfect healthcare system on this planet. And I think they've got a pretty decent thing going for them. It's a lot better than, you know, I worked in the United States, and yeah, we have amazing technology in healthcare, state-of-the-art technology and tools, but the problem is a lot of the people have no access to it because they have no insurance. They can't afford it. Whereas in Sweden, anyone who has a health issue that pays taxes and has a right to live and work here in Sweden has access to health care. And I'm not going to get into too much details on that, but that was a big factor in why I chose, say, moving here as opposed to some other place I thought about in some more developing type nations. The fourth reason is I don't tolerate heat well. I've worked in construction. I come from Texas. I was outdoors a lot, and I see my father get heat stroke. I've seen a lot of patients coming in that work in, say, landscaping, that sort of thing back in the States, and they would end up with some sort of like dehydration, heat stroke, a lot of other health issues because the climate is quite difficult. It was not just hot. I mean, it could be 45 degrees Celsius, like about 100 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 days straight in the summertime. It was also humid on top of that. So it was quite brutal to be there in that climate. You have to have the air conditioning on all the time. And here in Sweden, I tend to notice I thrive better in a cold environment. I'm like, you can always do something about the cold. You can always put on more clothing. Whereas in Texas, you could take off all your clothes and have the air conditioner on in your car, and sometimes the AC can't even get the car cold enough because it was just that hot. So I feel like personally for me, I do better in colder climates than I would in a warmer climate, which is why I chose, say, for example, Sweden over maybe somewhere like Spain, or maybe more of a Mediterranean climate, which tends to be very warm in the summer. And I just don't tolerate the heat well. The fifth reason has to do with my career as a nurse. So a lot of countries, nurses are not the height of profession as they are in the United States or Sweden. And so nurses are treated more like a nurse's aide. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, but the issue with that becomes I've been trained to do certain things. And if I can't use those skills, it seems kind of frustrating to me. You know, I want to be able to do everything that I've been trained to do. And not all countries is that the case. In many countries, stuff that nurses could do in the United States, that would be relegated to a doctor doing it or somebody else. And also, the salaries can be very bad in some countries, and my family still lives in America. Well, if I was making a very poor salary, then how am I going to be able to fly back, purchase an airplane ticket to go back and see my family? So it just made sense to me that with all the education that I've received, that I'd be able to use those skills to the best of my ability and have a reasonable salary. Now, Sweden doesn't pay very good compared to the United States and a lot of other countries, but it is in the higher range compared to, for example, France or Spain or Portugal or Italy. It does pay better than those countries. And so that just kind of made more sense. Also, I had thought about moving, for example, to Germany, but they have a very difficult system there to come into, and there's a lot of stuff that I can do as a nurse in America that I would not be allowed to do in Germany. So I just felt like it was a lot easier to come into the healthcare system here in Sweden, and I would be able to use more of the stuff that I've been trained to do. Another reason I chose coming to Sweden is the fact that Europe is closer to America than, say, some other English-speaking countries I thought about. I thought about Australia and New Zealand. I've been there. I love those places, but my parents are getting older. If something happens, I need to buy a ticket. It's not an easy feat being able to go back to the United States, because Australia and New Zealand are on the complete opposite side of the globe. Plus, they're very far from the places that I want to go visit, like, say, Europe. And so then I'm kind of back in that situation to begin with. So, like, usually when I buy a ticket, there are no non-stop tickets that I've been able to find going from where I live. I have to take Copenhagen Airport. And so when I'm flying back, I usually have to do at least one stop, like in, say, Frankfurt or in the United Kingdom. And it ends up being roughly about 15 hours of travel time, counting the layovers. Whereas going from Australia, it's going to be a lot more involved, a lot more difficult, and expensive as well. Seventh reason has to do with language. I thought if I'm going to learn language, it makes more sense, because I'm going to be working as a nurse, that I go to a place that speaks a language that's easier to learn. Now, Swedish is still very difficult. I am 42, so when I came here, I was about to turn 40. I'm not a spring chicken, and so it is not so easy for me to learn languages at this point in my life. However, compared to, say, I had considered for a while going and living somewhere like Japan or maybe even Korea, but their languages are so different and so unrelated to English. It would have been so much harder and would have taken so much more time for me to be able to learn the language to a high enough level to be able to work in, say, a healthcare system. So it just made more sense to go somewhere that spoke a language that was closely related to English, and it is. They do come from Germanic roots. The eighth reason has to do with citizenship, so I want to go somewhere where I could have the possibility of having dual citizenship. So some people say, well, why didn't you go to Norway? And why didn't you go to the Netherlands? Well, in those countries at the time when I was deciding to come here, I would not be able to have both American citizenship and the citizenship of those countries. Now, that may have changed recently, but that was the case at the time. Norway, it's not a part of the EU, and I thought if I'm going to live in Europe, it just makes sense to live somewhere where I could become an EU citizen as well, and then I would get the benefits that come with that. The ninth reason is I had already made friends here, so I'm not in a relationship with anyone in Sweden. However, I had come here on vacation before, and I met people on those vacations, and through them I met more friends, and a lot of them helped me actually when I decided to move to Sweden, of trying to help me find an apartment and get set up here and come to the Swedish system. So that was another big factor in me coming here. The 10th reason coming here is I am on the autism spectrum, and I felt like I subscribed better to the culture here in Sweden as opposed to America. There's so many things I love about America, but I just felt it was a little too much for me, and it was impacting my mental health. Like, for example, I feel like in America, you're forced to sell your own brand. Your brand is yourself, your personality, who you are. But in Sweden, you can kind of keep to yourself. You don't feel pressure. I remember, like, I went back on vacation again in Texas the other day during the holidays. And, you know, you go to, say, Texas Roadhouse, a steakhouse there in the United States. And I'm in the bathroom, and the guy in there is wanting to talk about politics, about, you know, Donald Trump. And I'm like, I'm never going to see this guy. I'm in the bathroom. I'm peeing. I don't want to be having this conversation. And this was a very common thing. And some people like it. They think, oh, this is so super friendly, and you can talk to everyone. But I personally feel a lot of stress when I'm around that. I like to be able to keep to myself, and you know, the traffic, and Texas is just growing so much now here lately. Like, all these people are moving to Texas, and the roads, the traffic, and the congestion, everything, it's fun for short periods of time, but after a while it just becomes too much. And in Sweden, I just feel like the lifestyle here is a little bit more laid back, a little bit more quiet. And I am actually living in Malmö, Sweden now, which is the third biggest city in Sweden, but even that size is only about 1/3 whereas, you know, the city I was born in was not a big city, and it was the same amount of population as here in the city I'm in now. So it seems pretty comfortable to me, and I seem to thrive better in this environment here in Sweden with my autism spectrum diagnosis. So those are the top 10 reasons why I chose to move to Sweden. Other people that have moved to Sweden may have other reasons why they chose to come here. I find one of the biggest ones is love. You know, they meet somebody and they come here for that. That wasn't my case. I think, too, some of the things that I mentioned in here, some people may feel very different about. For example, some people like warmer climates. They don't like cold climates like I do, and so they would tend to prefer something else. But that's just the reasons for why I chose to come here. And so just want to share that with you all, and thank you so much for your support. Feel free to leave your comment down below, and I'll try to get to it, and you'll have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.